Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Stern, Senior Manager, Local Arts and Business Partnerships here at Americans for the Arts. Welcome to the first session of part one of How to Partner with Your Chamber of Commerce series, Understanding the Chambers of Commerce Landscape. We have multiple resources available for you on this activity page to view in tandem with this recording. Access the toolkit under the Toolkit tab, the transcript for this video under the Transcript tab, and additional resources under the Resources tab. Email us at artsu@artsusa.org should you need any assistance. I'm pleased to welcome Sheree Anne Kelly, President and CEO of the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives, representing more than 10,000 industry professionals. Thank you so much for joining us, Sheree Anne. I'll pass it to you.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be with you today. This is a topic I'm really excited about, trying to explain a little bit more about what's a Chamber of Commerce, how do they operate, and more importantly, what are some of the ways you can think about partnering with your local Chamber of Commerce? So looking forward to the discussion, and hopefully this is going to give you some insight to be a little helpful in figuring out how you can leverage some of your local resources to advance your own work. So I'm from the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives, also known as ACCE. We are the global association that represents chambers of commerce. Our job is really to make chambers as strong and as successful as they can be. So we have about 1,600 member organizations, and that translates to about 10,000 chamber executives who engage in our programming and services in one capacity or another. And we help them in lots of different ways. It's through professional development, original research, benchmarking, thought leadership. We have peer connections where we bring chambers together to solve big problems, whether it's on a national scale or an international scale. So we're really here to serve chambers and the individuals who work for them. And there are a lot of different types of chambers of commerce out there. So there are geographic chambers. So if you live in a small town, you might have a local chamber of commerce, but there are also chambers that represent regions or counties. There are state chambers of commerce, and those are geographic chambers. So they serve their geographic markets, and they really help try to make those communities as strong as they can be. There's also something called affinity chambers. And an affinity chamber is a chamber of commerce that represents organizations that are focused in a specific affinity group. So there are Black chambers of commerce, Hispanic chambers, LGBTQ chambers, veterans chambers, women's chambers. These chambers of commerce are really trying to help serve businesses that are either owned or operated by individuals who are within that affinity group. So they're really helping, say, Black business owners figure out what are some of the best ways to run their organization, to find new funding sources, to find new supply chain opportunities. And they really help that affinity group a little bit more. So at ACCE, we actually have chambers of all types, whether they're geographic or affinity chambers, and we serve all of them. But there are some other national organizations that are in the Chamber of Commerce arena. So the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, they are their own independent chamber. They don't set the agenda for all of the chambers that are out there. And this is sometimes a misconception that whatever the U.S. chamber says, then all other chambers of commerce follow suit. It's not the case. So the U.S. Chamber is based in Washington, D.C. They're really known for their national advocacy on behalf of businesses. So they spend a lot of time working with Congress and the White House. And we actually work with them in some capacities. They're a member of ours. We help them, and we work together in certain areas. But again, we're all completely independent and unique. But then there are also national affinity groups. So there's a national Black chamber, there's the national LGBT chamber, the US Pacific Asian American Chamber of Commerce, the US Hispanic Chamber. Those chambers are sort of the national group for affinity chambers. And again, they work on national policy issues and national programming that supports those affinity chambers. All in total, there are more than 6,000 chambers of commerce across the US. And if you look at international markets, there are thousands of additional chambers of commerce. So lots and lots of chambers out there, lots of opportunity to partner and advance the work that you're doing and help partner on some of the work that chambers are doing. So if you've ever worked with a chamber of commerce, they're kind of traditionally known for a handful of things, right? Business support, most people think of a chamber of commerce as supporting business, right? Government relations, supporting the local economy, their local champions of the community, networking events, other types of events and programming, awards. This is, I think, what's kind of the traditional label of a chamber of commerce. But what's really great to know is that chambers are so much more than that. Chambers are all about community impact. And this is really what they focus on. They're all about solving the biggest challenges that our communities face. That's what the mission of strong chambers of commerce focus on. It's this higher purpose, and it can take many forms. Some chambers are really focused heavily on economic development, whether it's bringing in new business or making sure that there's more investment in the local economy, access to education and making sure that the local education system is as strong as it can be. Workforce and talent, that's a really hot topic for chambers, and I'll touch on that a little bit more later. The entrepreneurial ecosystem, how can we help solopreneurs or young startups get all the tools and resources that they need to be the most effective that they can in our community? And how can we attract entrepreneurs into our market? Policy and advocacy is still a huge part of what chambers do. They're really all about strengthening their community and their region. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is a huge topic that many of our chambers of commerce are working on, whether they're leading or supporting other local business organizations or other groups. DEI is huge. Healthy communities, I'll touch on some of these topics with examples in a few minutes, but also ideas like inclusive and equitable economic growth. So we realize that if some of our underserved populations aren't being lifted up, then our entire community suffers. So chambers are a whole lot more, I think, than people realize, and they're taking on these big community impact issues. It's less about transactional work, so less about selling one more ticket to a golf tournament, but it's more about transformational work. How can we transform our community and make sure it's the strongest that it can be? So it's really this North Star, the community impact and mission of a chamber is something bigger than ourselves. We really want to try to make our surroundings and our communities the strongest that they can be. And I think that's exciting, and that's what draws people into the work of chambers, and that's why the work is so important. So how does a chamber work? So chambers have members, so organizations that join the organization in order to get benefits. They also have investors, and these are groups that really invest in the mission and invest in the programs and services that are offered through the chamber. And then partners. Sometimes they may have partners on specific projects, programs, policy initiatives. So it's businesses of all sizes. They help mom and pop shops down the street, all the way up through national corporations. But they also help nonprofits of all types, and nonprofits get engaged in chamber work in lots of different capacities. They work with community groups, government on the local, state, national, and international levels. They will also work with religious institutions, school systems, local hospitals. So it's a really wide array of stakeholders who get engaged in the work of a chamber of commerce. So the chamber has both a staff as well as a board of directors. Generally speaking, the board tends to set some of the strategy, and they also serve as sort of local champions for the efforts that the chamber is taking. And then the staff helps to implement the programs and services, but it's also the staff's role to kind of keep their finger on the pulse of the local community. So they get to know the stakeholders, the businesses, the nonprofits, the challenges, and the opportunities. So between the staff and the board, they really work to figure out what are the greatest challenges that our community faces, and then they partner with other stakeholders in order to find solutions. So chambers, sometimes a chamber of commerce can also be the local community economic development organization. Some chambers also house their local convention and visitors bureau. Some chambers also house their local tech council. So chambers can take lots of different formats. It may be just a chamber, or a chamber in economic development, or a chamber in a tech council. But even if the chamber doesn't house those functions, they often partner with them on projects and activities. Really, a chamber has to be a convener, and they have to work with so many different entities within the community in order to make sure everybody's aligned with the vision and the focus and the direction of where the community is going. So chambers are definitely known as a portal to the business community, but I think it's important to realize they're also institutions in their own right, and that they partner with so many more groups than just local businesses. I mean, they have to be a trusted community leader and a partner. They're definitely conveners who bring together all of those different groups to try to solve challenges, but they're also catalysts for change. That's one of the roles that I think is important to keep in mind if you're thinking about working with the chamber, is that their job is to have courageous leadership around those community challenges. And leadership can take many forms. Sometimes chambers are really known for being conveners on certain issues, where they're bringing all those stakeholders to the table to talk about challenges and opportunities. Sometimes they're consensus builders, or maybe the sane center on an issue. They're trying to get everyone galvanized around a particular direction. And sometimes chambers are catalytic leaders. This is where they're catalysts for change, and they're shaping the environment around them. I get really excited about catalytic leadership because I think this is where you can have the most change within your community. So a few examples of really catalytic leadership that chambers take on that I think would be of interest, and maybe some areas that you'd never imagined a Chamber of Commerce as taking the lead on. One of those is diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've seen chambers all across the country and around the world putting on events that focus on DEI. Sometimes they're talking about topics like, how can we diversify supply chains for local organizations? Or how can we build a more inclusive community? And then there are some chambers who sort of take that to the next level. This is an example of a chamber that brought together stakeholders from across the community. So it wasn't just business, it was nonprofits and individuals from the education system, and said, what are some of the places where our community isn't as inclusive as it should be? And how should we address these issues and try to tackle these challenges? Those are some uncomfortable conversations. But again, this is a place where a chamber as a convener can really play a role. Some chambers have put together CEO pledges to improve DEI within the community. This is where CEOs commit to saying, we're going to improve the diversity of our workforce, or again, supply chain diversity. They can address any issues that are the real challenges within the community, but it holds those CEOs accountable to change. So DEI is one of those places where chambers are engaged. I mentioned talent and workforce. This is another huge, huge area. We know that talent is the inventory that drives economic development and investment decisions in our communities. So chambers are engaged in trying to attract new talent into the market. If you've got an existing workforce, you want to make sure they stay in your community and don't leave to go someplace else. I mentioned entrepreneurship, workforce preparedness, whether it's upskilling or reskilling local workforce to make sure that they've got the skills necessary for the jobs that are available locally, education, training, certification, but even topics like access to childcare, because that's a workforce and talent issue. Just an interesting example from the Wake Forest Area Chamber to kind of give you a flavor of what some workforce programs might look like. They have extensive talent programming. They offer leadership development. A lot of chambers get involved in this, where they bring in individuals from across the community and train them on how to be the most effective leader you can be for your community. They offer career readiness academies, financial literacy programs, lots of workforce programming there. Community health. This is another great area that chambers are engaged in that I'm not sure everybody realizes a Chamber of Commerce might get involved in a topic like this. And what's great about community health as part of a chamber's mission is you can define health any way that you want. Hopefully, as I'm sharing some of this content, you're starting to think about how this relates to the arts community and some of the work that you do. So a couple of examples on community health. This example from Longview, Texas, they brought together stakeholders from all across their community and said, what are our top health priorities? And they came up with a list of 5 health topics on your screen. So physical health, emotional and spiritual, financial health, career and workplace health, and community health. So all of those stakeholders now are aligned with the vision for the community, and they can pool their resources, their data, and their efforts in order to achieve goals that can help move the dial on those different health initiatives. Another really interesting example is from Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. They had a real issue with youth suicide, and that's a talent issue. and they realized nobody was really stepping up to address this challenge. So the local chamber partnered with other groups in their community, and they developed resources and services to help address some of the mental health challenges that they were facing. What they were able to see was a decline in youth suicide in the community. So big community challenge. They tackled that issue with other partners and saw real success. Even something like the opioid epidemic. This is an example from the Ohio State Chamber of Commerce. This is something that impacts so many of our communities, but it's also a workforce and talent issue. Sometimes these addictions show up in the workplace first. So they came up with a toolkit for employers. This says, what should I do if I think one of my employees has an opioid problem? What are the resources available to help them? Or how can I get them re-engaged in our workforce pool when they come back from a rehab facility? So again, big challenge in the community, and a Chamber of Commerce is often stepping in to help with that. So let's bring it back to you. So arts are a critical component to economic growth and talent attraction. Workers want to live in a community that's vibrant, that's vivacious, that has an active social scene, that has an active arts and culture scene. And that really affects workforce and talent decisions. It also helps with workforce retention. People don't want to leave a community that's built around a strong arts and culture within their region. It also helps with business development. Businesses want to invest in communities that are holistic and that have these kinds of resources and services available to them. So I just want to showcase a few examples of places where chambers have partnered with the arts community, so you just get a flavor of what's possible. Maybe this will help get some ideas flowing for you about how you might be able to engage your local chamber. So the Greater Des Moines Partnership is the Chamber of Commerce in Des Moines, Iowa. They created the art route. This is fantastic. It's more than 6 miles of art. They've got these big painted dots that you can follow in order to follow this art route. They've also decorated the crosswalks and painted them, and there are more than 80 pieces of art on display here. What's great about this is it really makes the downtown vibrant. It attracts tourists. People want to come and actually attend this art route. So those tourists come into the market and then they spend money on local businesses. So it's a win-win, and it makes downtown fun, vibrant, and just shows off some of the creativity in their market. Here's another example, the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. They're one of the supporting partners for the Arts and Business Alliance of Eugene. And they do some really creative things. They have something called Arts After Hours. This is a place where the business community and the arts community can network, meet each other, talk about their priorities, mix and mingle. They have art exhibits and live performances. So it's just a fun activity to do after work, but it's a place to meet others within the community. Then they have something also called Brava, which are their awards, and they offer awards to those in the arts community as well as those in the business community in places where there's intersection between the two. So it's a way to highlight some of the best synergies between arts and business. So the Chamber of Commerce of Greater Philadelphia, they actually have an Arts and Business Council within their chamber. They offer a couple of really cool things. They've got a leadership development program, and I love this idea. They realize that businesses sometimes need a creative edge when it comes to their leadership development. So they bring in professionals from the arts community to help local businesses figure out how can they think differently about problem solving, and how can they make sure that their workforce is using some of their creative side in solving problems within their business. But they also host events where they bring in speakers from the arts community. They talk about big picture issues, have thoughtful conversations about creativity, about leveraging the arts. So this is sort of woven into the local Chamber of Commerce. And then a sort of more modern example of something that came up through the pandemic. So the Tacoma Pierce County Chamber, they partnered with Spaceworks Tacoma. So during COVID, a lot of local businesses were boarded up. And the downtown area just wasn't looking very appealing when you've got all of these boarded up displays. So they decided to come up with rapid murals. This is where they created these beautiful murals downtown. This is wonderful. So you're partnering with business and the arts. And now these are Instagrammable moments, right? People want to go downtown and take their picture where they have bat wings, right? And it's a simple thing to do, but it really reinvigorated the downtown in a time when it was most needed. So some other thoughts about how you might be able to partner with your chamber. You could be partners in advocacy. ACCE has worked with Americans for the Arts on advocacy issues, so chambers may be perfect champions for some of your key issues. You could co-host events and networking programs. You may want to even see if the chamber's offices could be used as an art gallery. Chambers have lots of guests, they have lots of events, they have people coming and going all the time. Maybe a great place to leverage their wall space. Work together with them on community development work, or co-create an economic development plan or a program. It's really, there's no limit to what's possible, and there are lots of different ways that you can work together towards community impact work. So how do you build a relationship with your chamber? Get to know the chamber, learn its priorities, learn who their leaders are, and think big picture. Think about that shared community vision and what are some mutually beneficial outcomes we might be able to develop by working together. Be open-minded about partnerships and what the outcomes might look like. You never know if a chamber, they may already be thinking about partnering with the arts, or they may have never considered it before. You never know. Just go in with an open mind. If you can find a champion that can help you, that's even better. If you've got an idea, maybe see if you know somebody who's already engaged with the local chamber, bounce your idea off of them, brainstorm about what's possible, and see if you can't come up with something creative that you can bring to the table. Do you have economic impact data around arts in your community? This is something that I'm a huge fan of. If you can come up with some statistics, some data points around how much money the arts and nonprofit community brings to your local region, or how many jobs it creates, I think that's really helpful in showing some of the impact that you're having. So first steps in getting involved with your local chamber, I'd recommend attending one of their events or networking programs just to get a feel for sort of the vibe of what the chamber's all about. And check out their priorities on their website. That way you've got a really good understanding of what are they working on and where does that parallel with what you're thinking about doing. Follow them on social media. That can also give you a sense of sort of the type of chamber you're working with, the activities they're engaged in, the type of communications that they're delivering. Definitely bring creative ideas to the staff, but as I mentioned, be open-minded to what that might turn into. Check and see if you know anybody on their board of directors. That's a great way to get an in with the chamber. Their boards are usually listed on their website. And if you've got a partner with a board member, your idea is much more likely to sort of come to the table quickly. Think about those solutions to your community's biggest challenges, and maybe walk in the door saying, hey, I recognize this is one of our community's biggest problems, and while I don't have a solution in mind, I want to be a helpful partner. And leverage the resources of your association. I mean, Americans for the Arts has tons of great resources that can help you on all of these different initiatives. And I think they're a great starting point for figuring out how can I really work with my local chamber. So with that, I think those are the formal points that I wanted to discuss. I think at this point, Jessica and I are going to have a little bit of a back and forth and conversation to make it a little bit more of a dialogue.
Thank you so much, Sheree Anne. What an incredible presentation, and I'm so grateful again to have you here. I actually have 3 questions for you, an additional one. And I was wondering, before we get into a little bit of some kind of do's and don'ts of working with your chamber partner, could you talk a bit just about how different kinds of chambers, whether it's the geographic or affinity chambers, work together, and kind of how they divide or intersect in their communities?
Sure, that's a great question. There are lots of partnerships that take place between geographic and affinity chambers. So if there's a public policy issue that really impacts the local community, local businesses, access to resources, oftentimes they'll work together and form a coalition or advocate in tandem on behalf of that issue. Sometimes they'll put together programs together. There's so much intersection between the chambers. It's almost impossible not to have some sort of collaboration along the way. As I mentioned, oftentimes affinity chambers are going to focus a little bit more on programming specific to those affinity markets. So they may put together, let's say, a business accelerator for Latina business owners, and that's really their focus, is affecting change there. Whereas a geographic chamber, may support Latina-owned businesses, but they're looking at this broader sort of community landscape. But lots and lots of partnerships, whether it's in a small way or even in bigger, larger sort of co-creating plans kind of way.
Great. And then you've shared some ideas on first steps for engaging with a chamber, but what are some of the biggest mistakes that you think partners, whether in the arts community or otherwise, make when approaching a chamber or a business community at large?
Sure. I think one of the biggest mistakes made is coming to the table and saying, I've got this great idea and all I need from you is a check. That's probably one of the biggest mistakes. No organization, whether it's a big company, a medium-sized business, or a chamber of commerce, wants to be viewed as a piggy bank, right? They are creative problem solvers. They have lots of resources, lots of things to offer, and they've probably been considering, something in the same vein of whatever you're bringing to the table. So you really want to come, as I mentioned before, you want to come to the table open-minded and thinking of them as a partner versus just a transactional conversation. Think big. I think sometimes organizations come with this very discrete, small, tactical idea. But again, think about those big challenges in the community and what kind of unique skills are you bringing to the table that maybe the chamber might not have. And if you're trying to promote something, and let's say the chamber's never worked with an arts group before, maybe figure out, is there an example in another market that looks similar to our community that's been successful? I think showing a real world example that worked someplace else oftentimes helps you get your point across. So whether it's an example from the presentation you saw today, or if you find an example through one of your peers, I think that really helps sell an idea if you're bringing something to the table.
That's such a great point. It's so important to have things to point to and show how they could be adapted in different communities. Okay, so one more question for you, Sheree Anne. What are the hottest topics chambers of commerce and businesses are focused on right now?
Sure. So we are coming out of, hopefully, the COVID pandemic situation. I think for a lot of chambers, it's economic recovery. How can we make sure our community is strong in the long term? I think it's community recovery and community development, making sure that the community is prepared for the future. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are huge. As I mentioned, inclusive economic growth, inclusive communities. I think those are really big topics. Workforce and talent is huge, and it's that broad spectrum, and it really has to focus on what are the biggest challenges within your specific market. So not every chamber is focused on, let's say, entrepreneurship, but there's some component of workforce and talent that's engaged there. The intersection between education, government, business, and the general community, that's a big place that a lot of chambers are sort of working in right now. So I think that's something interesting that we're seeing. And then just the overall environment around us. So how is our sustainability as a community? How are our businesses focusing on sustainability? Again, are we as welcoming and inclusive a community as we can be? These big picture topics are ones that are kind of on the forefront right now because we're all thinking about the future and how do we want to make sure our community gets through and beyond this sort of economic downturn. Even the use of space. Some organizations are saying they're not going to come back maybe full time into their office space. So how do we reimagine corporate real estate and how do we leverage that space in new and creative ways? So those are some of the big hot topics right now.
This is great. before we close out, is there anything else that you wanted to leave us with?
You know, I just think the opportunity to partner with chambers is something that's kind of an untapped potential. Hopefully this gave some insight and gets people excited about the opportunity. Partnering with business across the board is great, but again, I think chambers serve such a broader set of stakeholders than just business. So hopefully you'll reach out to your local chamber and have a chance to work with them in the future.
That's great. I see so many parallels for how chambers are working as catalytic leaders, as you described, and how we encourage local arts agencies to do the same in their communities. So really appreciate this presentation. Sheree Anne, thank you. We at Americans for the Arts are so delighted to be working in partnership with the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
As a reminder, this is the first session of How to Partner with Your Chamber of Commerce, Part 1. As part of this package, there are 2 additional pre-recorded sessions and a digital toolkit to accompany this content. We invite you to participate in periodic live conversations with various presenters on these programs, to ask your questions and hear from your peers. All these sessions and toolkits are available on ArtsU, and you can also find the toolkits on the Partnership Movement at partnershipmovement.org. Thank you very much.